Welcome to our series of By Faith. Our goal through this series is for you to know what it means to live by faith, to walk by faith, to talk by faith, to breathe by faith, to do everything by faith. Why? Well, according to Hebrews chapter 11, verse 6, it says, without faith, it is impossible to please him. And I just believe that you're here because that's exactly what you're wanting to do. We're going to be taking a look at Hebrews chapter 11 this week, and that's been known as the Hall of Fame of Faith. The Hall of Fame of Faith. And again, Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1, which is our main theme text here, is as the King James says, that faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence, the title deed, the pink slip of things not seen. Today we're going to be taking a look at Abraham, and follow along with me in the scripture in your notes there of Hebrews chapter 11. It says, by faith Abraham, when called to go to a place he would later receive as his inheritance, obeyed and went, even though he did not know where he was going. Hello. I don't know about you, but sometimes it's exactly the way I feel. Maybe you're there right now as far as that's concerned. But it says, by faith, the topic of our series here, he made his home in the promised land like a stranger in a foreign country. He lived in tents, as did Isaac and Jacob, who were heirs with him of the same promise. You see, in Bible times, a house of their own was the object of everybody, to have their own dwelling, to have their own house in that sense. To live in a tent in those days meant that things were not yet settled. You weren't settled. So as a result, as it goes on to say, for he was looking forward to the city with foundations, whose architect and builder is God. By faith, Abraham, even though he was past age and Sarah herself was barren, was enabled to become a father because he considered him faithful. Because he considered him faithful. Because he considered him faithful who had made the promise. So from this one man, as he as good as dead, came descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and as countless as the sand on the seashore. Moses was about 75 years of age when he was called out of Ur, from what we understand. Listen, let me just say this to you. You're never too old to be called by God. You're never too old to begin to step out in what he is leading you by faith. You see, the easy thing for Abraham would have probably been able to say, well, that's nice. I appreciate the offer, God, but, no thanks. Things are good. I'm getting up there in age, and, it's not. And Abraham was already rich. He already had plenty enough money in that sense. See, I want to challenge you today. I want to challenge you to realize that you can't live by faith if you're going to sit back and be comfortable and not willing to take a risk. You see, faith requires that we get comfortable with being uncomfortable. I love that line. Let me use it again. It says, faith requires that we get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Why? Well, because between every promise and provision, there is a problem. You've heard me mention this on numerous times. But between every promise, between every vision, every dream that, God's been speaking to your heart about, that you've been looking at, and provision, in essence, when that dream or that vision happens, when it takes place, is a problem. And what a problem is the opportunity to live by faith. It's the currency, if you will, that gets the deal done, so to speak. It's what turns the promise into the provision. Understand that, because if you take a look at the story, it says he and Sarah were in their 70s and were childless. He didn't know where God was going to take him. It's like most men, they don't have a clue where they're going half the time anyways. And God was not offering him a map. He wasn't offering him a GPS system or anything along those lines. You know, it's just one step at a time. He's just showing him the next step. And I find that's so much so the way God works in our lives, especially in mine. Chances are, if he was to show me, and that's happened, where he showed me not just the next step, but maybe the whole picture, and I end up just messing it up anyways, in trying to do it my way, so to speak. But let me just say this: beware of the comfort zone. Beware. I feel like I'm in the twilight zone aspect of this. Beware of the comfort zone. Let me just say this: you can't live a life of faith by being comfortable. You can't live a life of faith if you get too comfortable. Because bottom line is, we're talking about the comfort zone. It's becoming a spiritual couch potato, just sitting there. Or like the new phrase that they have out today, a mouse potato. A mouse potato is someone who sits behind the computer with the mouse all day long, hours going by, clicking on and going through chat rooms, or researching things, or being in places where they shouldn't be in that sense, or even for good things. But you're stuck behind the screen there in that comfort zone. You can't live a life of faith from behind those things. Look, there is no such thing as maintaining. No such thing as maintaining. Please understand that. I mean, for example, if you're the one who manicures his yard and gets it all nice and green and weedless and it's just perfect, and then you go on vacation for 3 weeks and you come back, guess what? Boom. It's like you got to almost start all over again. And that's the idea behind it from that standpoint. Because there's no such thing as just getting it. It's like a farmer who goes out, plants the seed, and then just waits around for it to come up and fruit. It doesn't happen that way. You got to maintain it. Otherwise, the weeds begin to choke, and the ground becomes hard, and so forth and so on. Look, if you will, the comfort zone leads to atrophy, which is the partial or complete wasting away of a part of the body. In other words, it's a muscle that's not used. I remember when I was a teenager, I had broken my leg, and as a result, when they put the cast on there, I was in there for 6 weeks. Well, and even me as a teenager, breaking the cast by walking around all over the place with it, even that, not being able to use the muscle and the way it was intended to be used, once they took the cast off, I was amazed at how tiny and shriveled up my leg can be. I was horrified because I had this skinny little leg on this side and this kind of chunky leg on the other side, if you know what I mean. And as a result, that muscle, it was weird, it was uneven. So you had to work that muscle to get it back up to the place that it used to be so that it was in even cohorts with the other muscle. So, I just want to encourage you, don't know atrophy in your spiritual life. It's the same thing with faith as it is with our muscles in our body. We've got to use the muscles of faith in order to continue to realize them in strength. So pray, pray for people. Continue to step out in those areas. When I say pray for people, pray for their salvation, pray for their healing. Look, your job is not to fix someone. You can't fix someone, only God can. Our job is to minister and to pray for them, to believe God for their salvation in that sense, to believe Him for what only He can do in that sense. So we are to exercise it regularly, our faith. Exercise our faith regularly. See, the older we get, the harder it is to get out of the comfort zone. Oh, hello. I say that because it seems the older we get, the more we don't want to take a risk. The more we become, in that sense, like, no. But in Hebrews chapter 11, in the Hall of Fame faith chapter, men like Abraham, Moses were old. But on the inside, they stayed young. You see, there's a difference. You always hear about a bouncing baby boy, right? But you never hear about a bouncing grandpa man, now do you? Because chances are we'd end up breaking a hip or something. You know, we get older, we get more inflexible in that sense. We'll say things like, well, I don't like the music, or I don't like the way this, or this is too, why can't we, that's a spiritual symptom, if you will, of getting old, of old age. It's called the comfort zone. It says in your notes here, Abraham and Sarah chose to live in the faith zone. The faith zone. I like that term. So, well, it's sort of like, I like to get to a Cavs game every, a couple times throughout their season. And, I've been to some Cav games where I've watched LeBron James. And it just seems that night, it didn't matter what he threw up. Man, boom, it was hitting. He was in what we call the zone. Athletes talk about the zone, but it was like every time he threw up a basket or something, even when it seemed like, forget it, man, that thing ain't going anywhere, brick, it would swoosh right into the basket. And he's like, hey, great, he couldn't miss in that sense. And if I can put it to you this way, that's what we need to be like in the faith zone. Do you remember the story of the healing of the 10 lepers? Excuse me. When they had come to Jesus and Jesus healed them, and it says as they went, they were healed. It wasn't an instant healing right then and there. Okay, granted, it wasn't a day later or a week later, but it wasn't an instant healing either. It was as they went, they were healed. We need to know what it means to be wenting by faith, to be wenting by faith. Not wanting to see, but wenting by faith. You see, in that sense, they were wenting. Abraham and Sarah and these lepers were wenting. They went and obeyed without tangible evidence of the promise. See, by faith, Abraham and Sarah became catalysts for the blessing of future generations. Can I just say this? Don't just live by faith for yourself. Do it for your kids. Do it for your grandkids. Leave a legacy, if you will, a legacy of faith. And maybe you're watching this, maybe you're part of this, and you don't have a biological family, but I can tell you, you have a spiritual family. And you have spiritual sons and you have spiritual daughters in that sense. Because you see, the way that you end your life, the way that you live your life makes a difference in the future. We are called to be a catalyst for the blessing of future generations. So my question to you today is, what zone are you living in? You can't be in the LeBron James zone and sit on the bench and be comfortable. You got to go from being on the bench to that active place where you're moving forward in that sense. We've got to go from being a spectator to a fan to a player. We've got to realize what it means to go from that bench into that zone where with God all things are possible. Well, until next time, I want to encourage you again, walk by faith, live by faith, breathe by faith, and act by faith. So may God richly bless you. We'll see you next week as we continue the journey on this series of By Faith.